Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Working with Visionary Founders, an exclusive conversation with Dana Wagner, Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary of Impossible Foods. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Wendy Maldonado D'Amico. I'm Yale College class of 1993, and I am a director of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels. Our discussion today is co-sponsored by Yale Law School. Accelerate Yale is a global community of diverse alumni and friends of Yale engaged in innovation, tech, and entrepreneurship. Our mission is to cultivate an active, inclusive ecosystem that thoughtfully promotes meaningful connections and collaborations, while also serving as a bridge between alumni and current Yale students. Please note that we are being recorded with all participants muted. Today's session will be 1 hour and we'll reserve the final 25 minutes for your questions. If you have a question you would like to submit to our speaker, please do so via the buttons at the bottom of the screen. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator and featured speaker for today. First, we have Gary Stewart, our moderator. Gary Stewart is Yale College class of 1996 and a graduate of Yale Law School 1999. He is the CEO and founder of FounderTribes, an innovative app that gamifies founder education and provides access to mentors and fundraising. Until recently, he was the CEO and co-founder of The Nest, a mobile app that could be called Masterclass for Founders. From 2014 to 2019, Gary was the director of Wyra UK, a corporate accelerator backed by Telefonica. From 2010 to 2014, Gary was an associate professor of entrepreneurship at IE Business School in Madrid and CEO of Wyra Spain. He launched his first startup in 2005. Before becoming an entrepreneur, Gary worked as a lawyer in the US, the UK, and Spain. He graduated magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa from Yale College and was the executive editor of the Yale Law Journal at Yale Law School. He is a governor of the University of East London and has been on the power list of the most influential Black people in the UK. He is a member of the leadership teams of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels. And now our featured speaker for today is Dana Wagner, class of 1999 from Yale Law School. Dana has worked in a variety of senior positions in technology companies and in government. Currently, he is the Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary at Impossible Foods, where he oversees the company's legal, regulatory, governmental affairs, and security operations. He also sits on the board of directors at the Center Consortium, a cryptocurrency organization focused on stablecoin technology, and on the board of a nonprofit devoted to teaching computer literacy to young adults in Oakland, California. From 2011 through 2016, Dana served as the general counsel of the financial technology company Square, Inc., where he built and led the legal, government relations, compliance, and security teams. While at Square, he played a central role in the company's design and launch of innovative financial products, its expansion into international markets, and its initial public offering. Before that, he led antitrust, competition, and consumer protection matters at Google from 2007 to 2011, and he held various positions in the US Department of Justice from 2000 through 2007. Dana has taught and lectured at Yale Law School, Harvard Law School, Stanford Law School, Berkeley Law, Northwestern University, UC Hastings College of the Law, and many other institutions on the topics of law, business, and technology. He received his undergraduate degree in economics and comparative literature from the University of California, Berkeley, and his JD from Yale Law School. His personal interests include literature, sports of all kinds, and exploring the great foods and wines of the world. Dana, it's an honor for Accelerate Yale to host you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And now I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Gary Stewart.
Awesome, Wendy. And Dana, great to chat with you. Yale Law School class of 1999 in the house. So I think Wendy did a great job of giving us your background. But like as
I feel like I should be interviewing you. You sound like you have just as much to say.
No. This is your night. So what's your 1 minute pitch? What's your 1 minute pitch of who you are and what you've done?
I mean, there's a lot more to it than the professional side. If I were, just meeting people on the street, but on the professional side, I mean, I think Wendy gave it going backwards. I'll give it a little going forwards. I mean, I came out of law school, same year as you. I started off, I clerked for Merrick Garland. Nice to see him back in government in a non-traditional role and doing well there. I then went into the government for a number of years. I was interested in law and technology matters. I'd mainly focused on First Amendment and antitrust matters in law school, and I found an antitrust focused position in the Justice Department. I was in the government for a while. I became an assistant U.S. attorney out in the Bay Area for a while as well. So I started with 8 years in government service, and then, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit, I decided to go into the private sector for an opportunity at Google, and I established and led their antitrust and competition team for a number of years, which definitely became a bigger and bigger job and requiring a bigger and bigger team as those issues became more front and center for the company. And then after doing that for more than 4 years, I took a risk and took an opportunity to go be the first lawyer at Square, and I was their founding general counsel. And Square, today is a very large financial technology company with a variety of the products for entrepreneurs and businesses. When I joined it, it was 60 people with a single product and a lot of vision and ambition. And I was there from that stage all the way up into I took it public. We had a $3 billion IPO while I was there, and we built the team. We built the foundation for what it is today, which is a $100 billion company, and which is incredible if you saw it start where I saw it start. And then after about 5 years at Square and a little bit of an interim, I guess I must be a masochist, because I just decided to do it all again, but in a different industry, another disruptive innovation company, and that's Impossible Foods, focused on a very different problem. We make meat from plants and are focused on alternative plant-based proteins, but it's a lot like Square in some ways to me, and that is it's a company that is trying to rethink how an entire industry works, as Square did with financial services. It is coming into a world where there is a very large established incumbent industry, but an industry that doesn't work very well. It doesn't really serve a lot of the needs of the people it's supposed to serve, and isn't really scaling and growing very well. And like Square, Impossible Foods is using new technology, biotechnology in this case, not financial technology, to create a better, more scalable system for the problems it's focused on. And I'm doing it again. I'm building legal and government regulatory and trust and safety teams there. And I've been here about 3 years now, and I think we're just scratching the surface of what we can do.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I mean, I think the thing that I'm thinking is, in 1999, I knew nothing about tech at all.
Yeah,
Not even thinking about it. It seemed as if, like, in law school, we were kind of all meant to be judges or professors or academics, or partners. But even partners wasn't really kind of. So how did you kind of discover this whole Silicon Valley entrepreneurial thing? How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think that was really true to a great extent when we were in law school. I mean, now, like Wendy mentioned, some of the teaching I've done, a lot of the teaching I do, through Berkeley and through Northwestern in particular, most recently, it's these law schools where there's a demand from their students, and there's an interest on behalf of the faculty in exposing students to, setting themselves up for in-house careers or getting involved in law and technology in various ways. There was a little bit of that when we were in law school, I think, but it was pretty fringe. I don't think it was sort of considered an important part of the curriculum or really a main interest, either of the faculty or the students, frankly. And that's really changed. I sort of, like most things in life, there might have been a little bit of maybe subconscious design behind it, but I generally stumbled into it. I mean, because I was working on antitrust was always an interesting thing for me. I mentioned I did First Amendment and antitrust laws. I view those as very similar. I think they're both about one in the political sphere, one in the economic sphere, about egalitarianism and equality of access and being able for where it's ideas or businesses to compete fairly on a level playing field, and stopping businesses or politicians or political views with disproportionate resources from being able to drown out others as opposed to competing fairly on the merit. So those were philosophically areas of law that were interesting to me. At the time when we came out of law school in 1999, a lot of the antitrust work was dealing with the technology sector, right? The Microsoft, case from the Justice Department was in full effect, and there was a lot more attention being paid. Joel Klein was leading initiatives at the Justice Department to how competition law should work in the technology sector. So that was my entree into it, but I was doing it from the regulatory government side, which is very different from doing it, from the company side, whether it's the law firm or the company. I had always had a little bit of an interest in kind of business and entrepreneurism. Much to my parents' chagrin, I really liked Alex P. Keaton on Family Ties when I was a kid, and my former hippie parents were a bit aghast. But I didn't really pursue anything like that professionally. But when I was sitting in the Bay Area, working on these matters, I was always sort of interested in what was going on at the companies that we were looking at or working with or investigating. And when you're in the government, it's great work. I mean, being an assistant U.S. attorney and being a trial attorney at the DOJ were some of the best jobs I've had. But you're enforcing public policy and you're trying to ensure fairness and you're holding people accountable and protecting society against misdeeds. And it's extremely valuable work. But you're not really, at least in the roles I was in, you're not really building anything, right? Like you're protecting people and you're holding institutions, people's accountable for deeds and misdeeds at times, but you're not creating anything new in the same way that people in the entrepreneurial community. And I was very happy at the government. I wasn't looking to leave, but when I got approached, it happened a couple of times, and Google was the one I ultimately went for. But when I got approached by companies that were building things and creating something new and needed creative legal thinking to help make that happen, that was appealing to me. And that was part of what led me to Google eventually. And that started me in this sector that I didn't know if I would really enjoy when I started off in it, but it turned out I enjoyed it, and it's been a really interesting ride.
And so what's it like? Because I guess, you have big personalities and government and the U.S. Attorney's Office and all that, but then all of a sudden you're working with these two kind of visionary founders who are now two of the richest people in the world. I read that they're now worth each more than $100 billion. That must be nice. What was it like working with them, like earlier on in their journey, when they were still kind of young and rich, but still young? What was it like, especially you coming from the U.S. Attorney's Office? Yeah,
I mean, they were doing okay when I worked with them too. I joined in 2007, and they were, they weren't hurting for cash. But I really enjoyed working with them, and I think it may have helped me. I think a lot of people, even at that time when they came into Google, were really intimidated by Larry and Sergey and by Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO at the time. And maybe I should have been. I really wasn't. I think part of it was because I just spent years with the government, largely investigating CEOs and deposing them and having them in the grand jury and sometimes indicting them. And I didn't. It's not like I felt CEOs inherently walked on water, or that rich people were people I had a lot of respect for Larry and Sergey, but I didn't. Because of my work in the government, I'd seen a lot of sides of business leaders, and I knew they were people too. And I clerked for Merrick Garland, who I think is one of the most magnificent, intelligent, impressive people, certainly in the legal field, if not, the world. But I'd gotten to know him as a person and his, the things about him and his quirks, and no one's perfect. And so I just, thought these were really smart people. And I guess you always have, a little bit of imposter syndrome when you come to these environments. We all went through Yale Law School, so we dealt with that and come out the other side. And I just really enjoyed learning from them and working with them. And in terms of what it was like, I think Sergey, one of the things Sergey did really well that I really learned from, and I'm sure he's still doing it, is he was always just pushing people to think bigger, right? He thinks in very broad terms. And if you came in and said there was a small problem and you were going to try to solve it, he would think, was that really part of a bigger problem? And should we really be trying to solve the bigger problem? Or if you had, a solution or a proposal that the company should do a minor thing, he would be like, well, why aren't we doing that on a global scale? Why aren't we doing that in a way that will be 100 times larger? He just thinks very big, and I had not really encountered that in the same way in law school or in the government, and I took a lot away from that. Sergey thinks very differently from Larry. It's one of the reasons they work so well together. But the thing that really struck out to me about Sergey is he has a, I'm sorry, I think I mentioned, I meant Larry before. Sorry, Larry was the one who I was always impressed by how big he thought. Sergey also thinks big, but Sergey has an insatiable curiosity about like everything. Like he's always just going down rat holes, thinking about things, tinkering with things. The first time I met Sergey, I was in a meeting and I didn't really actually know what he looked like. You know, there wasn't, you know, it wasn't as easy. Google didn't have as many image searches back then. You didn't know what these people looked like. And this guy in like a sweaty guy in a bike outfit, like walks into the room like 15 minutes late and lies down on the couch, you know, behind it. And I'm like, who is this guy? And he finally like takes a seat at the table next to me because it was empty. And he opens up his laptop and he starts looking at pictures of submarines. And we were not talking about submarines in the meeting. And you know, eventually someone asks him something and he says something, and I realized that it's Sergey Brin. But he's a mind forever voyaging. He's always looking down. But this has led him to amazing insights and led the company to great things. The reason Google ended up with Google Earth was they acquired a company called Keyhole, which was a satellite image company. And it was kind of like my submarine experience. That, you know, there was an executive meeting and Eric and Larry were talking about something else. And Sergey was sitting there playing around with this thing on his laptop, and he turns around and says, "Hey, look, Eric, I can see your house from space." And Eric was like, "What?" And he's like, and you know, they were talking about, you know, the quarterly financial numbers or something. But Sergey had kind of gone down this thing of looking at this company and playing with it, and they got interested and they ended up buying Keyhole based on his explorations, and that became Google Earth, which led to Google Maps and led to a huge amount of valuable product they have today. So I think from Larry just always thinking big about the problems he was looking at, and Sergey just always looking at new problems and new ideas. It's part of what makes him so successful.
You know, you just said something that reminded me of something you said at our last reunion, which was this imposter syndrome issue. You know, and you said that you came into Yale and you hadn't really heard people using terminology like vis-a-vis. That's what I remember, and it was kind of like,
yeah.
You're like, why are people talking like this? It's like, tell us about your, you know, challenges with imposter syndrome, both at law school and later on in Silicon Valley, where you're kind of like the lawyer in this pool of really wealthy entrepreneurs who seem to be a little bit crazy sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, we all have it. Yeah, when I got to Yale Law School, people were using words that I had never heard in spoken English before, as you just mentioned. And somebody, I remember shibboleth. I did not know what a shibboleth was. I heard people like 2 or 3 times say shibboleth in class and reifying things. And so I go to my Black's Law Dictionary, you know, back in my dorm room. Shibboleth is not in Black's Law Dictionary. I had to go to another. I finally figured out. And look, I think we all deal with versions of that. Anyone who doesn't have imposter syndrome and who is participating in some of these events and institutions is it probably should. I mean, it probably is a bit of a narcissist. But I think you always have to just tell yourself that you're there for a reason. And over time, like I certainly did, you get more used to, you know, you gain more confidence. You realize you've been in unfamiliar situations before, situations where you were in over your head before. And you try to just put it away. I mean, it is still a little bit surreal to step back and think about some of these people that you're meeting with or these issues that you're in charge of. But I think for me at least, as you encounter more and more of those situations and generally, you know, do well and you realize that your idea was important, or that, you know, it was a good thing that folks listened to you, or that, you know, you didn't drop the ball when they, you know, handed it to you at the goal line. You develop sort of on the one hand, a quiet confidence, and on the other hand, like sort of a comfort with discomfort, like a realization that, as I said, you're there for a reason. I was, when Google and Yahoo looked at doing an advertising partnership together, which I was a key part of, I was in a meeting with, you know, the leaders of both companies, and I realized like I was probably the only person in the room who wasn't a billionaire, and certainly the only person in the room who wasn't, you know, a multi-hundred millionaire. And I was still paying off my loans from this glorious institution that we went to. But you know, no, these people don't care. And I mean, I know you interact with a lot of high-profile folks as well, and including, you know, celebrities, and they don't want you to care, right? Like they don't want you to be daunted by them. They hate it when people aren't treating them like a normal person. And if you're in the room with them, their time is very valuable. They want you in the room with them. And I think you just have to realize that over time and get comfortable. But it's always a little surreal. And I still sometimes have to check myself about wait, am I really making this decision, or are these people really asking my opinion? That seems weird, but it's not weird. Like we got here because we're good at what we do, and everyone who's listening to this call, part of the Yale alumni community, the same is true for them, and they should take confidence in that.
And then I guess the flip side of that is, after all of these years in Silicon Valley, have you ever thought, well, hey, I'm the only non-billionaire in the room. I'm as smart as they are. I can make some of these important decisions. Why don't I create a company, maybe a legal tech company? Have you ever thought about becoming an entrepreneur yourself?
Yeah, I'm not as smart as all of them, but yeah, look, I think I am an entrepreneur in a way, right? I mean, a lot of to practice my craft in this environment, like when you're taking disruptive companies like Google and Square and Impossible Foods, and you're providing their legal and regulatory guidance, there's not a lot of precedent for what you're doing. I mean, there's principles, and sometimes there's some precedent, but you have to operate very creatively and help them build things in ways that I consider very entrepreneurial. Like if you look at Square, for example, the idea for Square Cash came from my team. Square Cash is the peer-to-peer payments platform that Square has now, but we were looking at the Durbin Amendment and looking at sort of some of the regulatory changes that have been made with regulatory debit, and we said, hey, like regulated debit, and we were like, there's an opportunity to maybe use these rails of the debit network to create a low-cost, high-speed payments network. Like we should look at it. And so I went to our chief technology officer, and we started looking like, that's entrepreneurism from my point of view, and that came from a legal regulatory team, and a lot of those early Square Capital. The idea for Square Capital did not come from me or my team. The company was other people of the company were interested in making loans to small businesses, basically. And we realized that all the data we had from the transaction flows from all these payments on the Square system could effectively be used to underwrite entrepreneurs and small business owners who might not have great credit, but we knew that their businesses were doing well, and we thought maybe we'd create a product to do this. So the idea didn't come from our business, but how to do it initially, sorry, they didn't come from our team, but how to do it initially did come from my team. I mean, the leads and the CEO approached me, and they're like, look, we want to make loans to small businesses. Of course, it's Silicon Valley, so we want to do it tomorrow. Like, how can we do that? And the reaction was, well, if you want to issue loans, either you have to have a charter, you have to be a bank basically to issue loans. That takes a long time, and that's really hard to do, and that's going to take years. Or you have to partner with someone who can issue loans, who can originate loans, and that means partnering with a bank basically. And you got to negotiate an agreement with the bank, and that takes a while, and then they're going to take some of the economic upside, and that's going to be tough. So this is going to be really hard. And they're like, no, we really want to do it, tomorrow, maybe next month would be okay. So we started thinking about, well, how can we do that? And what I realized was, well, they don't really want to make loans to small businesses. What they want to do is they want to put capital in the hands of small businesses, and you can do that in different ways. And there are different ways of structuring that. And today it's loans, but the early days of the Square Capital program were not loans. They were, it was basically a kind of merchant cash advance. If you want me to geek out on it, it was a true sale of future receivables, sort of like factoring. But long story short, we figured out a structure where we could put money into the hands of small businesses in a legal, secure, and transparent way that did not require us to get a lending license because of how it was structured. It required risk for the company because there's no collateral or anything like that. But that worked, and I consider that to be entrepreneurial, right? So I think if you're helping highly regulated companies solve new problems, you have to be somewhat entrepreneurial. And I also think supporting entrepreneurs is not like working with these founders. There's lots of ways to be involved without, even if you listen to what I just said, so that's nonsense, Dana. You're not really an entrepreneur. Like, I'm working with and supporting entrepreneurs in a lot of capacities, right? I'm investing in their companies. I'm helping them build their dreams if I'm working for them. I'm teaching, and I'm hopefully helping some of the entrepreneurs. There's a lot of ways to be entrepreneurial, and so but to answer your question, yeah, I do sometimes think about starting my own company, and it wouldn't be a legal tech company; it would be something else. But maybe that'll happen someday. But in the meantime, my entrepreneurial itch is being scratched by my current work.
No, I agree with that. I mean, we had Jen Wang on. She's the CEO of Reddit, and she was saying her risk profile is not to be a founder, but she thinks that she's entrepreneurial just within the context of someone else's company. So I think
she is. Yeah. And also, like, your risk profile changes over time. Like, I don't know that I would have started company right out of school. Maybe I would have if I'd had a great idea and so there's a way to do it. But I think, if you're around founders and maybe you get a little financial security and you know the lay of the land a little bit better, things like that, maybe Jen will become a founder, down the road. It's up to her, but I certainly consider her entrepreneurial, and you don't need to found a company to call yourself an entrepreneur.
No, I agree with that. And I guess going to other kind of, famous entrepreneurs. So you did the Sergey and Larry thing, and then you did Jack Dorsey. So kind of what were the differences between kind of, the Larry and Sergey kind of team and Jack Dorsey, who at that point was basically running two companies, Square and Twitter at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, they're very different people. Well, when I first started with Jack, he had kind of been run out of one company and was doing this as a new product. He then got invited back to Twitter, and at the end, he was the CEO of both companies, which is an amazing return story, and there's not a lot of people able to do that. Jack is, Jack's very different. Jack has a different approach to design and technology than Larry and Sergey had. But I think the biggest differences for me was that my role was different and the companies were at different stages, right? And when I was at Google, I was leading an important team, but I wasn't leading the entire department, right? I wasn't David Drummond. I was the guy running the antitrust and competition stuff. I wasn't the chief legal officer who was overseeing all of that, plus a number of other teams in parallel. And the company was 2 years past its IPO when I joined it. It was, it felt big at the time. It was about 10,000 people, and I didn't know it was going to become obviously what it ended up becoming. But it was, with Square, I was, my role was different. I was coming in to lead and build not just teams but departments. And the company was much earlier in its life cycle. And so what Jack needed from me and what I was doing for the company were very different. I was sort of involved in everything. And I think my role doing antitrust for Google had set me up well for that, because it was one of the few roles, because antitrust became such a big issue for Google, because it was, involved in every product launch, basically every acquisition, obviously. A lot of the way, the ad contracts and the business development issues worked, the IP strategy, the global strategy, antitrust and competition at the end of the day ended up touching almost all of those things in some respect. Even the recruiting and hiring decisions, because there was my last year or two there was a big case about the recruiting practices of Silicon Valley companies and whether there were competition concerns there. So I was in these rooms because I had a specific area of expertise that was important to the company, namely the antitrust and competition expertise. But I was in the rooms. It's kind of the Hamilton thing, I guess. If you're in the room when it happens, and your eyes and ears are open, you'll learn a lot, even if you're not the one ultimately responsible for these decisions. And that was good training for being able to then make the jump from a specialist to a generalist and come into Square, where I was going to be responsible for those decisions, and had seen a company at its later stages, things being done right, things being done incorrectly, and being able to set those up for the first time. Larry and Sergey weren't asking me to set these things up for the first time. They were asking me to build a new team. But Jack was, and that's a different role, and that's different challenges. And so I had very different experiences at those companies.
And I guess, what were those differences? I mean, because in Square, you had to take it from 60 people to IPO. What were the main learnings that you got along that process of kind of helping a startup to scale all the way to exit?
I mean, there's so many. First of all, Jack Dorsey would certainly disagree with the IPO being an exit, right? Which is that's how you think about it. You're the business, that's the liquidity, right? But we always viewed the IPO as just a pit stop, getting more fuel for the journey. And we can talk about IPOs a little more if you want. But there's so many learnings. I think one of the key learnings for me, which is of interest to entrepreneurial folks, I think, is that when a company is at those early stages, if it's a good company with potential, right? If you're solving real problems and you have a lot of opportunity ahead of you, you can't do everything at once. And this, I'm sure very well as a founder engineer, but it's easy, hopefully it's easy to say no to the bad ideas about what the company, we should do this, or we should build this product, or we should launch in this market. If that's a bad idea, hopefully it's easy to say no to it. If it's not, you've got other problems. but it's hard to say no to the good ideas. And you have to say no, or at least not now, to a lot of good ideas, because you can't overcommit yourself. And now, it doesn't mean you should be singular focused on one thing, but you've got to prioritize. You've got to look at the resources you have. You have to look at the opportunities and figure out. You're going to have multiple ROI positive investments you could make, and multiple next good steps. When I was at Google, you didn't really have to say no to the good ideas so much, and that's both the strength and a problem at Google, that they basically have infinite resources and can do whatever they want now. And they struggle with that experimental aspect versus focus and how to run their business sometimes. But at Square, you couldn't say no to all. You couldn't say yes to all the good ideas. You had to say, and it's very hard for creative, entrepreneurial, visionary people to say no to good ideas. And you have to figure out a way of doing that, or else. And you also, something that Jack is extremely good at, by the way, is figuring out when something that looked like a good idea isn't a good idea fairly quickly before you go too far down the path. I think in the entrepreneurial business nonfiction literature these days, which I don't read, but I think this is called failing fast, or pivoting, which you should just call it failing. Now people call it pivoting. But Jack was excellent as we're going to do this, we're fully behind it. But if at a certain point it's not working, we're going to pull out and we're going to focus on something else. And that's also, letting go of things you thought were good ideas that turn out not being, or that are not at the right time for them to be successful. That's difficult, and that's something you have to do as well. Those were at least a couple of key takeaways from the ride. But there were so many learnings. Go ahead.
How do you, as kind of I think Steve Blank said that lawyers basically, have no role in Silicon Valley. Basically, it's like lawyers are like deal killers. Is the notion that they can't
Steve
see.
Blank said that?
Yeah, it's like Steve Blank and some other guy. It's like, and the idea is that lawyers are risk averse, and they're always telling you what you can't do or what you shouldn't do. But you have these visionary people who are like, oh, it's impossible, but I can make it happen. So how did you balance that? My job is to kind of mitigate risks versus this person who thinks that the world is his oyster and he can do anything that he dreams of.
I have two responses to that. Steve should know better. But look, the first is, that's like me saying, founding entrepreneurs are just reckless gamblers who don't give a care in the world about their investors' money. I mean, I'm sure that's true for some of them, but I don't think a profession should be defined by its worst people, and I don't think that's true of Steve, right? So I wouldn't castigate a class of professionals like that. I guess I have three things to say. The second thing I'll say is that does come from somewhere, right? In the sense that I think it comes from a couple places in my mind. First of all, entrepreneurs, and particularly visionary entrepreneurs, I'd count Steve in that category. So they hate constraints, right? They don't like accepting the world the way it is. They reject the world as it is, and they want to build a better world. That's what makes them so good. As a lawyer, part of your job is to help them navigate systems of constraints, legal systems, regulatory systems, commercial systems, or financial engagement. And so you didn't create those systems, and you're trying to help them succeed, through those systems. But you're often the person explaining to them what those systems are and what the constraints are. And that a lot of people who are in that role don't really enjoy hearing that. So I said to one of my CEOs once, look, there's all these things out there. There's these risks that we're taking. There's these constraints we're facing. And let's say you want to do 20 amazing new things. And the average lawyer out there would tell you, well, you can do 10 of those, but 10 of them are really too risky or they're prohibited and you can't do that. And a really risk-loving, reckless, roll the dice lawyer would say, you know what? I think you can do 16 of those things. There are 4 of them that are way out of bounds and can get you thrown in jail or have ridiculous downside risks. You should do them. But 6, okay. I could come in and tell you, you know what? I'm gonna say let's do 18 of those things, which is but all you would hear is I just said you couldn't do 2 things that you wanted to do, right? So. I think you're often you didn't create these things, and this is part of being successful as an in-house attorney, is you have to figure out how to get credit for the things you are improving and saying yes to, because they just assume, well, of course I should be able to do those things. And you also have to have the credibility and the communication techniques to be able to articulate when you're telling them they can't do something or that's not a good idea, why it's really true that they can't do it. And it's not you being too conservative. It's look, this is the world. I mean, I had to explain to Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, what the quiet period was like leading up to an IPO, where you like can't communicate for a while, basically. He thought this was awful. He's like, "What do you say? Of course I'm going to communicate." Like, and I'd say, "No, actually, we're not going to communicate in certain ways. This is, you know," and he was like, "Well, that's you know, it's a constraint. He doesn't like the constraint. He's going to challenge that. That's why he's good at what he does." He was like, "We got to lobby to, you know, rework that law. We got to change that law. We're not going to." I'm like, "Look, there are lots of laws out there that are irrational or don't make sense for a business, and we try to change them or find creative solutions to work within them. The Securities and Exchange Act of 1943 and 1934, these are not those laws. Like, this exists actually for good reason. We're going to adhere to the quiet period." And, you know, we got there. But so anyway, one of the reasons that people sometimes have that instinct that Steve is speaking to is because lawyers are just often the mouthpiece of the articulator of what the systems are. The other thing is, you know, there are lawyers out there who are not good at this, right? You know, especially lawyers who grew up at law firms or are serve an environment. Sometimes they are not super comfortable with risk. That's why they went to, you know, that career path. If you're in the legal field and you want to make money, you should not go to a law firm. Like, you'll make some money, but you'll work really hard, and you'll never be like, if you want to make a lot of money and you know, with a law degree, you should go start a company or go to a plaintiff's law firm, or, you know, go to, you know, some of these other options out there. But that takes a lot of risk. And so if there's a lot of self-selection in the law profession towards more conservative paths, and a lot of these entrepreneurs work with those people. Yeah, the final thing I'll say is like, there are plenty of entrepreneurs out there, and I don't, well, he's done a lot of companies. I don't think Steve is one of them, but there's plenty of examples of visionary entrepreneurs starting companies, great ideas, not paying attention to the legal stuff, and having their companies die because of that. Like, ask Zenefits if they wish they'd had better legal or regulatory counsel before they imploded over their flagrant violations of the law, right? Like, so, you know, entrepreneurs who don't listen to lawyers are deal killers too, in a lot of contexts. And there's a place for us. That's what I would say. So that was too long-winded of an answer. But,
no, but it gives a lot of detail. We'll be in touch. Next question I have for you is about Impossible Foods, because we've spoken a lot about like all of your other ventures. Impossible Foods, in some senses, is your first like mission-driven startup. I know. First of all, do you agree with that? I
wouldn't say that. No, I don't.
Okay, that was the first.
And Jack would not agree with that statement. And Larry and Sergey would certainly not agree with that statement. So
help us to unpack then kind of what is a mission-driven startup, and how have you what were the different missions that you've seen at your 3 different kind of startups?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's gotten more diverse and it's much bigger now, but you know, Larry and Sergey wanted to organize the world's information and make it universally useful and accessible, right? That was a mission for them, and it was a mission that spoke to me. I mean, as someone who grew up in, you know, downstate Illinois and didn't have access to a lot of the information and opportunities that, you know, people in the urban centers did, the idea that, you know, we're gonna put the Library of Alexandria at the fingertips of anyone with an internet connection anywhere. I mean, I thought that was a really important and valuable mission, and I was excited about that. I still am excited about that. You know, Jack wanted to empower entrepreneurs. He wanted to make commerce easy. He saw barriers to participating in the financial system that were ridiculous. If you were starting a business, or like a hobby that you hope to turn into a business, and you wanted to accept payment from customers in the way people wanted to pay, which was with credit or debit cards, like people aren't carrying a lot of cash around in their pockets anymore. Certainly they weren't then either. You had to get a merchant account, get an expensive or lease an expensive hardware terminal, pass a credit check, which made no sense because you're not like, no one's lending you money, you're accepting a payment, but you know, no one would let you, and entrepreneurs have terrible credit usually. Like, there were all these barriers to participating, and Jack was like, that's awful, let's absorb that complexity, let's give people a simple app they can download, a free piece of hardware they can stick into their phone, and they can be set up and taking credit card payments. And you know, like, that's, and even then he was already thinking of, and how else can we help these small businesses? How can we give them capital? How can we help them optimize, build loyalty programs with their customers? I mean, he wanted to democratize commerce, and I thought, you know, again, my litmus test is always, is this going to help people, you know, where I'm from? Not because I'm selfish, but because I think, you know, my area was not historically well served by technology, and I'm not interested in building like apps to help millennials in major metropolitan centers order their coffee faster, or you know, date each other more easily. So that's all great, and those are good businesses. But that's not what I want to do. And when I saw small businesses in my hometown that were suddenly like growing and able to support their customers' businesses better because of Square, that I was like, well, this could be something. And Impossible Foods certainly is in that genre. I mean, there is a the reliance on animals in the food system is not great for the animals. It's not really great for a lot of the people either. But it's not scaling, and it's in many ways the primary contributor to climate change, which was news to me. I thought of, if you asked me to think about industries that were contributing to greenhouse gases and global warming, I would have thought about transportation and power. It turns out agriculture is an even bigger contributor. It uses, responsible for more loss of biodiversity, more land and resource destruction, more freshwater consumption, and more greenhouse gas emissions than almost all of those other things. And so being part of a company that is really trying to save the world in a way, and change the way it looks from space, and build a sustainable and ethical food supply for the next generation, and actually for this generation, that's really exciting too. So, but I don't, I'm sure I could go get a job at, name your evil corporate company du jour. I'm not going to name one because I once was in an interview and I named one and that got me in trouble. So, but I could probably go work at those companies, but that's not where I want to put my efforts. And I started in the government. I've always wanted to be part of mission focused things, and I still am, and that's important.
All right, last two questions because Wendy's popping up.
Yeah, I can go fast. Sorry, I'm long-winded.
No.
It's good to talk to you. I haven't talked to you in a while. So it's nice to see you. So I'm probably I'm forgetting that there's like a bunch of people listening to us. It's just like we're chatting, which is your ploy. It's successful. It works.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great. So penultimate question, Wendy, is you're an angel investor. You invested in FounderTribes, so thank you. And a lot of other startups. Like, what do you look for when you're investing? And for the founders that are out there in the Yale community that might be saying, hey, I'd love to have Dana Wagner on my cap table. Like, how should they approach you?
So angel investing is very different than later stage investing, as you know. When you're angel investing, there's not a lot to evaluate, right? It's not a business. There may or may not be a product. What I'm really looking for in angel investing is a couple of things. That's all there is. I'm looking at the opportunity. Like, what is the problem these folks are trying to solve, or the value they're trying to bring? Is there a good opportunity there? And what's the addressable market? Is this something that could actually succeed in some way? I guess I'm looking at three things. The second thing I'm looking at is the team, right? Because you have, like, who are these people? Do I trust them? Do I want to work with them? Do I believe that they have what it takes? Are they committed to this? Are they thinking about it the right way? There's different things, but I look at the opportunity, I look at the people. But there's also, is this something I want to be involved in? Because I'm not. You never want to be, as I've learned from binge watching Shark Tank during the pandemic, like, a lot of they don't want to be dumb money, right? As Mark Cuban calls it. Like, you want to think that you could add value and actually help these people, build their dreams and their companies. That's part of the fun. So, is it something that I want to be involved in? And FounderTribes was a yes to all of those things. The last angel investment I did was a company. Wendy mentioned I like the culinary world. It's a wine investment company basically. It's called Vinovest. It's angel stage, it's early stage, but they I believe in their founder, and I know this is important. We've talked about this. He's not a he has a diverse team. He's not just a straight white male like me, and that's fun to support. And he's trying to democratize an asset class basically, and make it easy for people to invest in and create more liquidity for the wine market, which I think is, and I like the wine market. So but angel investing is gambling, right? It's so speculative, and it's like being at the craps table, right? If you're gonna do it, you don't want to put any money on the table that you're not happy to lose. You're going to avoid the dumb bets. I don't play the field bets and things like that. And you don't know if it's going to work out or not. So you have to just know that you'll enjoy throwing the dice. And I enjoy, finding people who are looking at something where I think there's opportunity, and I'm going to have fun working with them. That's what I really work. And in terms of contacting me, I don't know, they could probably contact you, and you know how to contact me. I'm basically not on social media, but I do have a LinkedIn account. That's the only quasi social media thing I have. And I also have an AYA account. So anyone in the Yale community can search for me through I think it's not AYA anymore. It's some courtyard thing or something, but I'm on that. So if you're searching the alumni database, my email is on there.
And then last question, because I guess this is co-sponsored with a law school, and a lot of law school students, if they want to emulate your path and be the next kind of Dana Wagner, they want to have like an exciting career like the one that you did, what would your 3 last bits of advice be before I pass it over to Wendy for the general Q&A?
I mean, I get this version of this question. Like, if you want to be where I am now, you shouldn't start off the way I did, right? I mean, life is just too like, oh, go to the government for 8 years, and then like join a post IPO company that may have some upside, but business model isn't really figured out yet, and then go to a 60-person thing, and then quit for like a year and a half and walk the earth, and then like I think it's like being a federal judge, from like you can't. There are things that you can do to increase your chances of being a federal judge, but you shouldn't get your heart too set on it. You should do things that you enjoy doing anyway, because what administration is in power, what opportunities are there, like what's the politics that you wouldn't want to spend your whole life thinking I'm going to be a failure if I'm not a federal judge. And like being a general counsel or chief legal officer at one of these companies, if that's what you want to do, and there are things you can do to increase your chances, but you should also just make sure that you're doing things that you want to do independent of that. So I guess that's my first piece of advice, is like the best way to end up in a position, in any position, in the legal or professions, is to just do well at whatever you're doing first, right? And if you're distorting your choices because you think it's going to take you to some later path, but it's not really what you want to be doing, you're probably not going to be as good at it. You're not going to be as passionate about it. So I guess I could be super trite and say follow your passions, but I believe that you should do things that you think will set yourself up for wherever you want to end up, like developing certain skills. It's helpful to be able to read a balance sheet if you're going to be an executive at a tech company, right? Like there are some fundamental things you should do, but I think the most important thing to do is just excel, and you're most likely to excel if you're doing things that you're genuinely passionate about and curious about, and that's hard to fake. So I think that's the big one. And I think going back to the imposter syndrome question you asked earlier, you believe in yourself, right? I think we're our own worst enemies, and particularly there's lots of studies this tracks gender and race and other things too, but like people feeling they don't belong in the room. Every person on this call belongs in the room, right? Like you have the talent to become part of the Yale community. You have the resources and potential mentors and opportunities that community affords you. If there's something you want to do, but I can't become a professional basketball player no matter how much I want to do. Maybe I could have earlier, I don't know, but maybe a bench player. But believe it, like it sounds super trite, but it's so like believe in yourself. Don't censor yourself if there's an opportunity out there that you're excited about, and follow things that you're really interested in doing, because doing well at things is the best way to set yourself up for having more options. That's what I would say.
Awesome. Well, with that, awesome job. It's fun talking to you always. And I'm going to pass it back over to Wendy so that we have a few minutes of Q&A from the audience.
Excellent. Such a fun conversation. Thanks to both of you. So I have this really juicy question from Shruti. Can you talk about a moment when you thought you might be fired?
I think I always take the attitude, like sometimes you have to deliver hard advice. And by the way, like I'm skirting the line a little bit, but like there are privileged reasons why I can't talk about some of these things in huge detail, because it's the client's privilege. But a lot of times in the roles I've had, you're delivering advice to often a strong personality, as Gary mentioned, CEO or board member that they're not going to really want to hear. And there is always some concern of, well, if they react really badly to this, are they going to think I'm not the right person, or I'm Steve Blank's conception of an attorney or something like that. And the attitude I have eventually come to is that you just can't worry too much about that, and they don't actually want you to, because the day you let that bias your advice, the day you're not giving the right guidance or your honest opinion because you're concerned about the reaction, is the day you should go home. That's the day you're not doing your job. So yes, there have been situations. First of all, like you got to pick your bosses too. Like I never thought Jack was going to fire me for explaining to him what the quiet period was like before an IPO. But there are people out there who might have, and I don't want to work for those people. So like don't pick really volatile, irrational people to. I don't know the guy personally, but from what I understood, I wouldn't have really wanted to work with Travis Kalanick, although he's a great entrepreneur in many ways. I think he was pretty hard to represent, legal guidance and opinions in front of. I have huge respect for Elon Musk, but he went through like 3 general counsel in like a year, and then like couldn't get another one for 2 years, and ended up hiring his divorce attorney. There are people who are great, but you don't necessarily want to be their general counsel or their chief legal officer. There have been times when I've made mistakes where my judgment has turned out to be wrong, and I've worried about, well, is that going to affect what they think of me? But I never actually worried too much about being fired for those things, because I'd picked the people I was working with well, I think, and I had good relationships with my bosses, and B, I think I've always felt like I'm giving you my best. I'm giving you my all. I'm giving you my honest opinion and advice. If you're going to fire me for that, I don't want to work for you, right? So there's like there's revealing behavior in that, and so that's why I've honestly never really worried about it. I've always felt like if I'm doing my best, I have to manage the reaction and deliver messages in a good way. But someone's going to fire me for doing my job, I don't want any part of them. But when we're coming into these jobs, it's nice to have good employment contracts. If you get fired without cause, you got some protection there. That helps you mitigate the risk too.
Okay, just one more quick question, and then we'll have to wrap up here because we like to end on time. Yannick Joseph asks if you would want to talk about any of your experiences in speaking with venture capital investors in your role as a legal advisor, and you can take that. She used WeWork as one particular example, but she wanted to know about your experience in that context.
Yeah, well, look, because I work for highly regulated companies, and that's by design, I think that makes the job more interesting. I have a lot of contact with the investors. A lot of them are on the board, and I'm the corporate secretary, and I'm the chief legal officer, and so I'll interact with them on board matters and governance, and they'll want my opinions on the regulatory and legal aspects of things we're doing. But also when we're fundraising, probably to a greater extent than if I were at a company where the legal and regulatory issues were less front and center. You're a big part of the fundraising experience and the investor relations as well, because that's a risk that they're vetting, and they want to know who's in charge of these issues and how do those affect the risk profile of the business. So, and obviously when I'm investing myself, I interact in a different way. But in this capacity, yeah, I have a lot of direct exposure both to the venture capitalists that are involved on the cap table or on the board when I walk in, and on getting new ones on the cap table and on the board, and that's I think they really value someone in this role because they know that the CEO, if they're a good CEO, which mine all have been, very good CEOs, they're visionary, they're looking at the opportunity, they're looking at the upside, that's what they're selling. They know that someone in my position is looking around the corners and thinking about the risks and thinking about how to mitigate and those, and making sure we're guarded against the downside. Great CEOs do a sort of that too, but like the CFO, they rely on the general counsel to help them get the company's perspective on those aspects, which are really key to their investment decisions or their investment performance. So yeah, I have a lot of very close relationships and encounters with the venture capitalists and the investors.
I was going to just jump in and say, Dana, if I remember correctly, you got this job at Impossible Foods by reference to one of the investors in Square. Yeah,
I was pulled there. There was I ended up in Impossible Foods. I don't think this is a secret. Coastal Ventures had led the Series A for Square. Vinod Khosla had been on our board for a long time, and when I, after taking some time off after Square, wanted to come back in and take another professional, full-time professional opportunity, Coastal Ventures heard that I was back in town and looking around, and they pulled me in to see if they could get me involved in another one of their companies. And that was ultimately what led me to Impossible Foods. So yeah, that's been an important network for me.
Excellent. Okay. All right, everybody. So let's wrap it up. I know that Gary and Dana could spend the rest of the afternoon, talking far into the London night.
We might.
In London right now, and Gary and Dana is on the West Coast. But anyway, we have to wrap it up, much to my regret. So first of all, Gary, thank you for moderating. Such great questions as always. Dana, it was just such a pleasure to host you today.
It's fun for me too.
The Accelerate Yale community. It's such an honor to have you. I wanted to just thank and acknowledge a few folks here as well. First, we wanted to thank Yale Law School for co-sponsoring today. The law school is the gift that keeps on giving. You guys are such great partners to Accelerate Yale. Thank you so much. And we also wanted to thank the Yale Alumni Association Shared Interest Groups for making this webinar possible, because without them, we don't have a Zoom platform. Yay. Okay, so our recording of today's webinar will be available probably by Sunday. It will go up on our YouTube channel, so be sure to subscribe to that. We're now past 100 subscribers. And it will also be posted on our social media networks on LinkedIn and our Facebook page. And then just to keep your eye out for our next event, it will be on May 12th. We will be speaking with Hearst Lab, which is a corporate accelerator out of the Hearst Corporation. They support women-led companies. So I'm going to be in conversation with Jacqueline Duvall, who is another Yalie and a scout for Hearst Lab. And we're going to be talking to two women-led companies who are led by Yale founders. We're talking to Priori, which is led by Basha Rubin and Mira Levitt out of Yale Law School, as well as we're going to be talking to the founder of Mental Canvas. The founder is Professor Julie Dorsey of the Computer Science Department. So it promises to be a great conversation. That will be May 12th at 6 p.m. Eastern, and that too will be recorded. So if you can't make it, no worries. You can always find it on our YouTube channel. In the meantime, I just wanted to thank everybody again for joining us in the middle of the workday. Please look out for the recording, and thanks to everybody. Have a good rest of the day and the evening.
Thank you all. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Gary. This was fun.
Yeah, no, thank you.
All right, bye-bye.